I was having the most ordinary Wednesday evening, scrolling through Netflix and debating takeout options when the anonymous text arrived. "You should see what your fiancée did at her bachelorette party." I was expecting drunk karaoke footage or maybe some embarrassing dance moves. What I got was 3 minutes and 42 seconds of pure relationship chaos that somehow turned me into the mastermind behind the most elaborate wedding prank in history. Julia's Miami adventure featured more plot twists than a soap opera and enough material to fuel months of hilarious revenge schemes. By the time I finished orchestrating the most epic wedding cancellation ever, even she had to admit my comedic timing was flawless. But let me start from the beginning, back when I thought I had everything figured out. The perfect setup for disaster. I'm Mark, 31 years old, and I was your basic guy who thought he'd figured out the whole relationship thing. My buddies called me lucky because I'd apparently hit the jackpot with Julia. She was 29, worked in marketing, had this infectious laugh that could fill a room, and knew exactly how to make Sunday mornings feel like a vacation. We'd been together for 5 solid years, moving in together after year 2, getting engaged on the beach where we had our first weekend getaway, and planning what everyone said would be the perfect wedding. Julia seemed like she stepped out of one of those romantic comedies where the girl is somehow perfect, but still chooses the regular guy. She remembered every stupid anniversary, actually enjoyed watching football with me and the guys, and could cook these elaborate dinners that made my mom jealous. When she moved in, my apartment transformed from a bachelor cave into something that actually looked like adults lived there. She had this way of making everything better without making it feel like work. Wedding planning became Julia's full-time hobby. She had binders for everything and organizational skills that would impress corporate executives. I handled the easy stuff like the bachelor party venue and picking between chicken or fish for dinner. She managed everything else with military precision. Our venue was booked, flowers arranged, photographer secured, and guest list finalized 8 months in advance. Everyone kept telling us how organized we were, how mature our approach seemed compared to other couples who stressed about every detail. The Miami Bachelorette trip was Julia's one request that I had zero input on. She wanted to celebrate with her 7 closest friends at some beachfront resort. I thought it sounded perfect for her. Julia loved the sun, enjoyed dancing, and deserved to blow off steam after months of wedding planning stress. Her friends were mostly good people, though a few liked to party harder than others. Still, Julia wasn't the type to get out of control. She was responsible, always looked out for everyone else, and usually ended up being the designated decision-maker when her friends got too drunk. I drove her to the airport on that Thursday morning, and she was practically bouncing with excitement. Her suitcase was packed with sundresses, bikinis, and enough sunscreen to protect a small army. She'd made a playlist for the flight, downloaded 3 books she'd been meaning to read, and double-checked that she had everyone's contact information. I kissed her goodbye at the departure gate, told her to have the time of her life, and reminded her to send lots of pictures. She promised to text me updates and laughed when I joked about not running off with any Miami Beach boys. Julia's text updates throughout the weekend painted the picture of a perfect bachelorette celebration. Friday brought messages about their gorgeous hotel rooms and dinner at some trendy restaurant. Saturday featured beach photos with the girls looking tan and happy, followed by updates about club hopping and meeting friendly locals. Sunday morning came with hungover but satisfied messages about how much fun they'd had and how ready she was to come home to me. Every text made me smile and feel grateful that I'd found someone who could have a good time but still missed me enough to keep in touch. Looking back, the comedic timing was absolutely perfect in the most twisted way possible. While I was proudly showing her beach photos to my coworkers and bragging about having the coolest fiancé ever, she was apparently starring in content that would eventually destroy our relationship. While I was telling my mom how excited I was to marry someone so trustworthy and loyal, Julia was making decisions that would turn our wedding day into the greatest disappearing act of my life. The universe had clearly decided our love story needed a plot twist that would make Shakespeare jealous. I expected her Miami trip to be the kind of boring bachelorette story that involved too many cocktails, embarrassing dance moves, and maybe some harmless flirting with strangers who would never matter. The most scandalous thing I imagined was her friends talking her into getting a temporary tattoo or taking shots with some random spring breakers. I figured I'd hear funny stories about her friends getting too drunk, someone losing their room key, or the group accidentally staying out until sunrise. Normal bachelorette party chaos that would become funny memories we'd laugh about for years. Sometimes the universe develops a sense of humor so dark it makes professional comedians look like amateurs. My perfect relationship was about to become the setup for the most elaborate punchline ever delivered, and I was still completely clueless about what was coming. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone was about to reveal she'd been practicing for a completely different kind of performance, one that would turn our fairy tale into the kind of disaster that people still talk about years later. While Julia was creating memories in Miami, I was back home handling final wedding preparations with the confidence of a man who believed everything was going exactly according to plan. Miami Vice meets wedding prep. That Friday afternoon, I walked into the tuxedo shop feeling like everything was going exactly according to plan. The black suit fit perfectly after the alterations, and I spent 10 minutes adjusting the bow tie in the mirror while mentally rehearsing my wedding day timeline. The shop owner congratulated me and made jokes about cold feet while I signed the receipt. I drove home humming some random song on the radio, completely oblivious that 1,200 miles away Julia was creating footage that would make my tuxedo rental a complete waste of money. My phone buzzed with her first text around dinner time. "Girls are getting ready for tonight, miss you already, babe." I smiled and showed it to my roommate Dave, who rolled his eyes and called me whipped. I texted back telling her to have fun and be safe, then went back to organizing RSVPs that would soon become irrelevant. At that exact moment, Julia was probably selecting her outfit for whatever Miami had in store, though I couldn't have imagined that the video would later show multiple camera angles in a hotel room rather than any club scene. Saturday morning brought another perfectly mundane wedding preparation session. I felt safely on top of every wedding detail, from catering confirmations to final vendor calls. Mrs. Patterson had updated her order to vegetarian, the Johnsons needed gluten-free options, and my cousin Mike still insisted he was bringing a plus one even though he'd been single for 2 years. I handled these logistics with the satisfaction of a man who believed his biggest concern was whether the weather would cooperate for outdoor photos. Julia's Saturday texts arrived with clockwork precision, each one a masterpiece of creative writing that belonged in a fiction category. "Beach day was amazing, getting ready for dinner now." The accompanying photo showed all 8 girls posed by their hotel pool, tanned and smiling, carefully cropped to show only female faces and bikini-clad bodies. I forwarded the picture to my mom with a caption about how beautiful Julia looked, completely missing that the photo's tight framing might have been hiding some important details just outside the shot. That evening I grabbed beers with my groomsmen at our usual spot downtown. Tony, Jake, and Marcus listened to me ramble about how excited I was to marry someone who could have fun with her friends but still sent sweet messages throughout the day. I read them Julia's latest text. "Dinner was incredible, dancing later, love you so much." They all agreed I was lucky to have found someone so thoughtful and trustworthy. Jake mentioned how his ex never bothered texting during girls' trips, while Tony said most women forgot their boyfriends existed during Bachelorette weekends. I felt smug knowing Julia wasn't like other women, not realizing she was exactly like certain types of women who were very good at compartmentalizing. My Sunday started with a productive morning at Home Depot buying supplies to fix a leaky faucet in our apartment. Julia would be home that evening, and I wanted everything perfect for her return. I spent 2 hours under the kitchen sink, occasionally checking my phone for updates from Miami. Her messages painted a picture of hungover girls slowly packing and preparing for departure. "Last breakfast in paradise. Can't wait to see you tonight, baby." I replied with heart emojis and jokes about her inevitable sunburn, completely unaware that she was probably nursing entirely different kinds of soreness. Comedy reached peak levels when I stopped by my parents' house for Sunday dinner. I spent the entire meal bragging about Julia's communication skills and showing off her beach photos. My mom gushed about how gorgeous Julia looked and how mature she was to stay in touch during her trip. My dad made his usual jokes about bachelor parties being more fun than bachelorette parties, while I defended Julia's friends as responsible adults who knew how to have a good time without getting into trouble. Every word out of my mouth aged like milk in the desert sun. Julia texted me her flight updates throughout Sunday afternoon. Boarding now, followed by taking off, and eventually landed safe, grabbing bags. I tracked her progress like mission control monitoring a space launch, proud of my responsible fiancé who kept me informed of her every move. The dramatic irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. While I was calculating her drive time from the airport, she was probably rehearsing explanations for any evidence that might surface from her Miami adventure. I picked up our wedding rings Monday morning from the jeweler who had engraved our initials inside the bands. The old man behind the counter talked about his 50-year marriage and how communication was the secret to lasting love. I nodded along enthusiastically, clutching the ring box while mentally composing my wedding vows. At that exact moment, Julia was probably fielding phone calls from her bachelorette party companions, making sure everyone had the same story about their innocent weekend of sisterly bonding and moderate alcohol consumption. The timeline of that week created perfect dramatic tension that would make screenplay writers jealous. Every mundane task I completed, every vendor I confirmed, every detail I finalized was building toward a wedding that would never happen. Julia's careful text management throughout her trip had bought her exactly enough time to get home, act normal, and almost make it to the altar before her Miami vacation footage would detonate our entire relationship like a delayed action bomb with perfect comedic timing. Wednesday morning arrived with beautiful weather and my complete confidence that everything was falling into place exactly as planned. I had no idea that evening would deliver a message that would turn all my careful preparations into the setup for the most devastating punchline of my life. The anonymous whistleblower. My phone buzzed at 8:47 p.m. with a text from an unknown local number. The message was short and direct in a way that immediately made my stomach drop. "You need to see what your fiancée did at her bachelorette party. She's not the person you think she is." Below the text was a video attachment that showed up as a gray rectangle with a play button in the center. My first instinct was to delete the whole thing without opening it. This had all the hallmarks of one of those scam messages designed to get you to click on malicious links. The timing seemed too convenient, arriving just 3 days before my wedding when emotions were running high and people might make stupid decisions. But something about the message felt different, more personal than the usual spam that promised miracle weight loss or foreign lottery winnings. The more I stared at that gray rectangle, the more my curiosity started eating away at my common sense. What if this wasn't a scam? What if someone actually had information about Julia that I needed to know? The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was obviously fake, probably some elaborate prank or a case of mistaken identity. Maybe someone thought they were texting a different person about a different fiancé who had actually done something wrong. I spent several minutes caught between doubt and instinct, knowing that whatever was in that video would either be nothing or everything. The moment right before I opened that video was the last time my life felt normal. I was still a guy planning his wedding to the woman he loved, still excited about our future together, still completely trusting in everything we had built over 5 years. I had no idea I was about to watch my entire relationship explode in real time. I expected the video to be something embarrassing but harmless. Maybe Julia had gotten drunk and done some ridiculous karaoke performance, or one of her friends had filmed her doing something silly that she'd be mortified about later. I figured I'd watch 30 seconds of drunken dancing, roll my eyes at whoever thought this was worth sending to her fiancé, and delete the whole thing. The worst-case scenario in my mind was that she'd flirted with some random guy at a club, which would require a conversation but wouldn't end our relationship. What I saw instead was surprisingly clear footage of my fiancé in a hotel room with 2 guys who clearly weren't random strangers she just met. Julia appeared completely sober and enthusiastically engaged, her body language showing familiarity and comfort that suggested this wasn't a spontaneous drunk decision, but something that had been planned or at least anticipated. She was laughing and talking to them like old friends, directing the action with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The horror started building slowly as my brain tried to process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't some blurry, questionable footage that could be explained away or misinterpreted. This was crystal clear evidence of Julia engaging in activities that would require a complete rewrite of our relationship history. Every laugh, every movement, every word she spoke was captured in perfect detail, leaving no room for doubt or alternative explanations. 3 minutes and 42 seconds doesn't sound like a long time until it becomes the duration required to completely destroy your future. I watched every second of that video with the same horrified fascination people have when they can't look away from car accidents. Each moment revealed new layers of betrayal that I hadn't even imagined were possible. The timeline of our relationship suddenly looked completely different when viewed through the lens of what Julia was apparently capable of. My physical reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My hands started shaking first, followed by a sick feeling in my stomach that made me think I might actually throw up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I felt like someone had punched me in the chest and knocked all the air out of my lungs. My brain kept trying to find logical explanations that would make this footage make sense without destroying everything I believed about Julia. The sound quality was clear enough to hear every word Julia spoke, every laugh, every conversation with her co-stars. There was no mistaking her voice or her face, no room for hoping this was some elaborate case of mistaken identity or deepfake technology. This was definitely my fiancé, definitely engaged in activities that made our upcoming wedding ceremony feel like the punchline to a joke I didn't understand yet. The truth had arrived in my living room with devastating clarity, leaving me no escape route into denial or misunderstanding. That anonymous text had just handed me the most expensive education of my life, and the tuition was everything I thought I knew about the woman I was supposed to marry in 3 days. As I sat there staring at my phone screen, I realized I was about to become an expert in analyzing a performance I never wanted to see. The Oscar-worthy performance review. Julia's performance in that video deserved critical analysis because it revealed acting skills I never knew she possessed. Her starring role showcased a level of enthusiasm and coordination that suggested this wasn't her first time handling multiple co-stars simultaneously. What struck me immediately was Julia's obvious sobriety throughout the entire performance, her speech clear and movements coordinated, eliminating any possible excuse about impaired judgment. She moved with purpose, actively directing the action and making suggestions with complete comfort and familiarity. The most memorable moment came when Julia looked directly into the camera with a smile that would haunt my dreams for months afterward, delivering her line with perfect timing. "What happens in Miami stays in Miami, right?" Those 9 words contained more finality than any breakup conversation could have achieved, becoming the official epitaph for our 5-year relationship. The production featured Julia as the clear director, choreographer and lead performer, managing 2 supporting actors with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling in life. Her enthusiastic participation killed every potential defense before it could be born. Julia wasn't being coerced, pressured, or taken advantage of by anyone in that hotel room. She was clearly enjoying herself throughout the entire production, her body language showing complete comfort with the situation. Her delivery of that Miami line showcased comedic timing that professional entertainers would envy. She paused just long enough to make eye contact with the camera, smiled with genuine amusement, and spoke the words with the confidence of someone who believed she was starring in a consequence-free production. The fact that she was looking directly at the recording device while destroying our relationship added a layer of surreal comedy that made the whole situation feel like performance art. The laugh that followed her Miami line became the soundtrack to my nightmares for the next 6 months. It wasn't a nervous giggle or embarrassed chuckle that might suggest some awareness of wrongdoing. Julia's laugh was genuine, delighted, and completely carefree, like she just delivered the punchline to the world's most expensive joke. Julia managed to destroy a 5-year relationship in under 4 minutes of footage, which had to be some kind of efficiency record for romantic devastation. Most relationships die slowly through accumulated grievances, growing apart, or gradual loss of connection. Julia chose the nuclear option, compressing years of betrayal into a single video file that could be watched, rewatched, and analyzed frame by frame, until every detail was permanently burned into memory. The professionalism of her performance was absurdly impressive given the amateur nature of the production. Julia demonstrated range, enthusiasm, and technical skills that suggested she'd been hiding significant talents throughout our entire relationship. She managed positioning and pacing with expertise that showed she understood camera angles and viewer engagement. Clearly, she'd found her true vocation in life, just not the one I'd expected when I proposed. Watching someone you love transform into a complete stranger in real time creates a specific type of psychological horror that no amount of therapy can fully prepare you for. The Julia in that video bore no resemblance to the woman who'd been planning our wedding, discussing our future children, and sharing my bed for the past 5 years. She'd become someone I'd never met, performing acts with enthusiasm that she'd never shown in our private moments together. Julia's performance revealed technical skills and enthusiasm that made me question everything I thought I knew about our physical relationship. Her comfort level with the camera, her natural ability to play to the audience, and her obvious enjoyment of the entire situation suggested this might not have been an isolated incident. The confidence she displayed indicated someone with experience in this type of performance art. The video quality remained crisp throughout the entire 3 minutes and 42 seconds, capturing every facial expression, every movement, and every word with clarity. Modern phone cameras had apparently reached the point where they could document relationship destruction with high-definition precision. Technology had made betrayal documentation easier than ever before. Julia's natural camera presence was undeniable throughout the footage. She never appeared self-conscious about being recorded, never seemed surprised by the camera's presence, and actually seemed to play up her performance when she noticed she was being filmed. Her comfort with the recording device suggested this wasn't spontaneous documentation, but rather planned content creation with willing participants. The realization that people show you exactly who they are when they think you're not watching became the most expensive lesson of my life. Julia's Miami performance revealed her true character in ways that 5 years of daily interaction never had. Sometimes the most honest version of someone only emerges when they believe their actions will never have consequences, when they think their secret performance will stay buried in Miami hotel room footage forever. That anonymous video had delivered the truth about Julia with crystal clarity, ensuring I couldn't misinterpret, or forget a single detail of who my fiancé really was underneath the performance she'd been giving me for 5 years. Now I had to figure out what to do with this devastating information, and my first instinct was to avoid any confrontation until I could process what I just witnessed. The art of strategic retreat. My immediate reaction was to implement the most strategic retreat of my life. I couldn't confront Julia right away because my brain felt like it had been put in a blender and set to puree. Instead, I decided to claim illness and sleep in the spare bedroom, which gave me crucial time to process what I'd just seen without having to look at her face and pretend everything was normal. Julia came home around 10 that night looking perfectly normal, which somehow made everything worse. She walked through the door with her usual smile, dropped her purse on the kitchen counter, and started telling me about her day like we were still living in the same reality. I managed to mumble something about feeling sick and needing to lie down early. She bought the act completely, even offering to make me soup and asking if I had a fever. The internal comedy show was brutal. Here she was playing concerned fiancé while I was sitting on knowledge that would turn our wedding into the most expensive magic trick ever performed. Thursday morning brought the most absurd breakfast conversation of my entire life. Julia sat across from me eating cereal and asking about my health while I was literally dying inside. She wanted to know if I felt well enough to handle the final wedding preparations, whether I needed her to pick up anything from the pharmacy, and if I thought I'd be better by Saturday. I gave Oscar-worthy performances answering her questions while mentally calculating how many hours until I could escape this nightmare. She even reached across the table to feel my forehead for fever, and I had to resist the urge to laugh at how perfectly she was playing the caring fiancé role. My covert packing mission began the moment Julia left for her final dress-fitting Thursday afternoon. The irony was absolutely perfect. While she was getting fitted for a wedding dress she'd never wear, I was stuffing essentials into a duffel bag. I grabbed enough clothes for a week, my laptop, important documents, and the few personal items that would be impossible to replace. Every item I packed felt like evidence of a life that was about to cease existing. I moved through our apartment like a ghost, seeing our shared possessions and wondering how we'd ever divide up 5 years of accumulated stuff. I called Tony while Julia was still out and asked him to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. When he arrived, I handed him my phone without saying a word, and watched his face change as he processed the same footage that had destroyed my world the night before. Tony went through the exact same progression. I had confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally anger on my behalf. Having another person confirm that I wasn't hallucinating the whole thing felt crucial for my sanity. "What are you going to do?" he asked after watching the entire video. "I'm not getting married," I said, and hearing those words out loud made the decision feel real and final. Writing the note was harder than I expected because I wanted it to be perfect in its simplicity. I went through about 6 drafts before settling on something that said everything without saying too much. "I know what happened in Miami. The wedding is off." Those words managed to capture the complete destruction of our 5-year relationship without any unnecessary drama or explanation. Sometimes fewer words pack more punch than lengthy speeches, and I wanted Julia to understand immediately that I knew everything and there would be no discussion, no negotiation, no second chances. The symbolic moment of placing the engagement ring and apartment key on top of that note felt like closing the final chapter of a book I never wanted to finish reading. That ring had cost me 3 months of salary and represented everything I thought our future would be. Leaving it there on our kitchen table felt like returning props from a play that had been canceled before opening night. The ring and key looked so small sitting there on that piece of paper, but they represented the end of everything we'd built together. I shut off my phone before leaving the apartment because I knew the emotional hurricane was coming, and I wasn't ready to deal with the devastation yet. This tactical decision to go completely dark was probably the smartest move I made during the entire crisis. I needed time to process everything without being bombarded by calls, texts, and messages from people who still thought I was getting married in 2 days. The silence felt like a protective bubble that allowed me to think clearly for the first time since receiving that anonymous video. Tony's couch became my temporary headquarters for the most important strategic retreat of my life. Trading a king-size bed for a pull-out sofa wasn't ideal, but it beat staying in the apartment and pretending everything was normal until Saturday. Tony's place offered something invaluable: complete distance from Julia and all the reminders of our life together. His guest bathroom didn't have her makeup scattered across the counter, his kitchen didn't smell like her coffee, and his living room didn't contain 5 years of shared memories embedded in every piece of furniture. My disappearing act was the perfect response to drama I wasn't equipped to handle face-to-face. Some situations require confrontation and lengthy discussions about feelings and betrayal and working through problems together. This wasn't one of those situations. Julia had made her choices in Miami, documented them for posterity, and now I was making my choice to vanish completely rather than stick around for the inevitable lies, excuses, and attempts at manipulation that would follow. Sometimes the best response to ultimate betrayal is a complete disappearing act that leaves everyone else to figure out what happened. I'd chosen the nuclear option of relationship endings, total silence, and complete removal from the situation. Friday night passed in peaceful silence at Tony's place, but I knew that come Saturday morning, the chaos would begin. The Great Wedding Day Vanishing Act. Saturday morning brought the moment for my greatest disappearing act in modern wedding history. Instead of waking up excited to marry the love of my life, I was lying on Tony's pull-out couch preparing to perform the ultimate vanishing trick that would leave 150 people staring at empty altar space. I turned my phone back on around 8 in the morning and watched it immediately explode with notifications. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree with missed calls, text messages, voicemails, and notifications from every social media platform I'd ever joined. 47 missed calls and over 60 text messages created a digital orchestra of confusion, anger, and desperation that documented the complete destruction of multiple people's Saturday plans. Julia's text journey provided a masterclass in the 5 stages of grief compressed into real-time digital communication. Her messages started Thursday night with confusion. "Where are you? Your note doesn't make sense, call me." Friday morning brought panic as reality started setting in. "Mark, please call me back, we need to talk about this, the wedding is tomorrow." Friday afternoon escalated to anger when she realized I wasn't responding. "This is insane, you can't just disappear." "People are flying in for our wedding." Friday night brought bargaining as desperation kicked in. "Whatever you think happened, we can work through this, please don't do this to us." Her family's evolution from anger to confusion to awkward silence played out through a series of increasingly frantic voicemails from her mother, father, and sister. Julia's mom started with righteous indignation about me being irresponsible and immature. Her dad left a message threatening to come find me and demanding I explain myself like a man. Her sister's first voicemail accused me of having cold feet and ruining everyone's plans. But as the hours passed and more information probably came to light, the tone shifted from anger to bewilderment to uncomfortable silence. My mass text to wedding guests deserved recognition for its brutal efficiency. I composed it Friday night and scheduled it to send Saturday morning at 9 a.m., exactly 2 hours before the ceremony was supposed to start. "The wedding is canceled, Mark." 6 words that crashed 150 phones at once, creating what I imagined was the most synchronized moment of confusion in recent wedding history. The chaos at the wedding venue must have been absolutely spectacular to witness. St. Mary's Church had been decorated with white roses, baby's breath, and all the elegant touches Julia had spent months planning. The altar was set up perfectly, the musicians were probably warming up, and the photographer was likely testing his equipment when 150 phones buzzed at exactly the same time. I pictured guests checking their messages, looking around at each other in confusion, and slowly realizing they were all holding the same bombshell announcement. Julia's family faced the impossible task of explaining to confused relatives why the groom had just evaporated without warning. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had traveled from across the country were standing in a beautifully decorated church, holding cancellation messages and looking for answers that Julia's parents couldn't provide. The awkward conversations must have been priceless as people tried to process what had happened and whether they should hang around for answers or just head back to their hotels. The absurd image of a fully decorated church with no wedding and a very expensive catered lunch with no celebration became the perfect metaphor for Julia's Miami adventure catching up with her. All that planning, all those deposits, all those months of preparation had led to empty pews and confused caterers standing around with platters of food that nobody would eat. The flowers were perfect, the music was ready, and the venue looked exactly like Julia had dreamed, but the crucial element of a willing groom had mysteriously vanished. My phone continued buzzing throughout the morning as the reality of the situation spread through our social circles. Friends who hadn't received the mass text started calling after hearing from others. Julia's bridesmaids were leaving increasingly frantic voicemails asking where I was and what was happening. My groomsmen were confused because they'd been expecting to meet me at the church for photos. The ripple effect of my disappearing act was spreading through everyone we knew like a relationship earthquake with aftershocks that would probably continue for weeks. Julia's desperation was evident in her final Saturday morning texts, which had evolved into full-length novels explaining how this was all a misunderstanding and begging me to show up at the church. Her messages revealed increasing panic as she realized I wasn't bluffing about the cancellation. The woman who had been so confident in Miami was now facing the consequences of her actions in front of 150 witnesses to her humiliation. The beautiful irony of the situation wasn't lost on me even in my emotional devastation. Julia had spent months planning the perfect wedding day, coordinating every detail from flowers to music to seating arrangements. She'd created a flawless production that would showcase our love story to everyone we cared about. Instead, her Miami performance had turned the whole event into a different kind of show entirely, one where the star of the production was notably absent and the audience was left wondering what the hell had just happened. Sometimes the best wedding gift you can give yourself is not showing up when you discover the person waiting at the altar isn't who you thought you were marrying. My Vanishing act had turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into the most expensive comedy show ever performed, complete with a cast of confused guests who got front-row seats to the fallout from Julia's Miami adventure. By Sunday morning, the immediate chaos had settled into an uncomfortable silence, but I knew Julia wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. The real show was just beginning. The Aftermath Comedy Hour. Julia's damage control campaign launched Sunday afternoon with all the strategic brilliance of someone trying to convince you that what you saw with your own eyes didn't actually happen. Her first phone call to Tony's landline came around 3 p.m., after she'd apparently figured out I wasn't answering my cell. She wanted to explain everything, she said, because this was all a big misunderstanding that had gotten blown completely out of proportion. Her voice had that practiced calm that people use when they're desperately trying to rewrite reality. Her greatest hits album of excuses rolled out with predictable efficiency. First came the classic, "It was a stupid drunk mistake" routine, which might have worked if the video hadn't shown her stone cold sober and directing the action like a seasoned professional. When that didn't land, she moved on to peer pressure from her friends, claiming they'd talked her into something she never would have done on her own. The final act was the "it didn't mean anything" defense, as if the emotional significance of the betrayal somehow made the physical acts less real. Her bridesmaids had filmed the entire performance, turning them into accessories to relationship murder with camera phones, but Julia glossed over their starring roles as enablers and videographers. My explosive reaction to her casual attitude about betrayal being standard operating procedure probably woke up Tony's entire neighborhood. Julia had started defending her actions by arguing that pre-wedding flings were completely normal behavior that everyone engaged in before getting married. She'd apparently been reading different relationship textbooks than the rest of us, because her version of standard pre-wedding traditions included activities that most people would consider relationship-ending betrayals. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was making such a big deal out of something she considered typical bachelorette party behavior. The conversation revealed this wasn't some random encounter with strangers she'd met at a club, but a planned weekend adventure with guys her friend group had been hanging out with for weeks. They'd apparently met these men at some bar in our neighborhood and had been texting back and forth about meeting up in Miami. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a spontaneous mistake. It was a coordinated effort that required planning, communication, and group participation that made her drunk mistake excuse even more ridiculous. Julia's final attempt at manipulation came disguised as a prediction about my future regret. She told me I'd realize I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and that I'd spend years regretting throwing away our perfect relationship over one weekend. Her tone suggested she genuinely believed I was being irrational, and that eventually I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness for my unreasonable reaction to her perfectly normal behavior. When her threats and predictions failed to produce the desired effect, Julia pivoted to playing the victim with the skill of a method actor preparing for an Oscar audition. Suddenly she was the wrong party in this situation, unfairly abandoned by a fiancé who couldn't handle a little harmless fun. She started rewriting our relationship history, painting me as controlling and jealous, someone who had never really trusted her, and was looking for any excuse to run away from commitment. Her bridesmaids launched a coordinated social media campaign to rehabilitate Julia's image that would have impressed political spin doctors. They flooded Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter with posts about how heartbroken she was, how cruel I'd been to abandon her, and how the whole situation was just a misunderstanding that had been blown completely out of proportion. They shared old photos of Julia and me looking happy together, with captions about how love was supposed to overcome all obstacles. The social media blitz painted Julia as a victim of circumstance who'd made one tiny mistake that her vindictive ex-fiancé had used as an excuse to humiliate her in front of everyone they knew. Her friends posted long paragraphs about forgiveness, second chances, and how real love meant working through problems instead of running away at the first sign of trouble. They conveniently left out any mention of the 3-minute and 42-second video that had documented her enthusiastic participation in activities that went way beyond a simple mistake. Julia's backup plan revealed itself as the classic cheater's playbook: make the betrayed partner into the villain, while positioning herself as the victim of his unreasonable expectations and cruel abandonment. She'd apparently spent years perfecting this strategy, because she deployed it with the efficiency of someone who'd used it before. Every conversation, every social media post, and every interaction with mutual friends was designed to shift blame and garner sympathy. The comedy of her damage control efforts became apparent as more details emerged about her Miami adventure. Friends started sharing information that contradicted her carefully constructed narrative. Details about the planning that had gone into the weekend, text messages that proved premeditation, and witness accounts that exposed the lies she'd been spreading to minimize the damage to her reputation. Julia's insistence that I was overreacting to normal behavior revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of basic relationship boundaries that made me grateful the truth had come out before we'd actually gotten married. Her casual attitude toward betrayal, combined with her shock at my reaction, suggested we'd been living in completely different relationships without me realizing it. She'd been playing by rules I'd never agreed to, while I'd been operating under the assumption that we shared the same basic values about loyalty and honesty. Sometimes cheaters reveal their true character not just through their betrayal, but through their response when they get caught. Julia's damage control campaign became a masterclass in manipulation, deflection, and victim playing that showed me exactly who I'd been planning to marry. Her backup plan to make me the villain proved she'd always been prepared for this possibility, which somehow made the whole situation even more devastating. But Julia's family wasn't content to let their daughter handle the fallout alone, and they had their own ideas about who should pay for the consequences of her Miami adventure. Financial warfare and family drama. The financial warfare began Monday morning when Julia's parents called demanding I pay for a wedding that didn't happen because their daughter decided to star in amateur adult entertainment during her Bachelorette weekend. Her mother left a voicemail explaining that they'd covered the initial deposits, but the final payments had come from our joint account, so clearly I owed them reimbursement for the entire celebration. The logic was breathtaking. Julia destroys our relationship with her Miami performance, but somehow I'm financially responsible for the aftermath because vendors still needed to be paid. Julia's father decided subtle conversation wasn't his style and showed up at my office Tuesday afternoon like some kind of debt collector with anger management issues. He marched past the reception desk, found my cubicle, and started yelling about responsibility and manning up while my coworkers pretended to focus on their computer screens. Security had to escort him out after he threatened to make me pay one way or another, apparently unaware that his daughter's video performance had already cost me everything I cared about. Our joint savings account became the center of a legal battle that required actual lawyers to determine who owed what for a celebration that never happened. The account contained $31,000 we'd saved for the wedding, honeymoon, and house down payment. I'd contributed about $20,000 of that total, but Julia's creative accounting claimed I'd stolen money that belonged to both of us when I withdrew my half. Her version of shared finances apparently meant everything was hers regardless of who earned it or deposited it. Julia's mathematical skills reached new heights when she calculated that I owed her money for ruining the wedding she destroyed with her Miami adventures. She claimed the canceled vendors, lost deposits, and unused services were all my fault because I'd chosen to abandon her instead of working through our problems like mature adults. Her spreadsheet of damages included everything from the photographer's cancellation fee to the emotional distress her bridesmaids suffered when they couldn't wear their custom dresses. The lawyer consultations cost more than our wedding flowers but provided priceless peace of mind about my legal position. My attorney explained that unmarried couples have limited financial obligations to each other, especially when one party causes the relationship's destruction through infidelity. The legal fees stung, but knowing I wasn't financially trapped with Julia for the rest of my life was worth every penny. Negotiating cancellation fees and vendor payments became an absurd exercise in dividing responsibility for expenses nobody wanted to pay. The caterer wanted their final payment regardless of whether anyone ate the food. The photographer demanded compensation for clearing his schedule even though he never took a single picture. The band required payment for learning our first dance song that would never be played. Every conversation felt like negotiating the cost of a car accident where everyone agreed Julia was the drunk driver, but somehow I was expected to pay for the damages. The house purchase falling through turned out to be the universe doing me another massive favor disguised as additional financial stress. We'd been scheduled to close the following week on a 3-bedroom colonial that would have legally tied me to Julia through a mortgage for the next 30 years. Losing our earnest money deposit hurt temporarily, but avoiding homeownership with someone who just revealed her true character saved me from decades of financial entanglement with my betrayer. Dividing our shared possessions required the emotional stamina of someone separating belongings with a person they never wanted to see again. 5 years of accumulated stuff had to be sorted, divided, and distributed while maintaining minimal contact with the woman whose Miami performance had destroyed everything we'd built together. Every item carried memories that now felt contaminated by knowledge of who Julia really was underneath her perfect girlfriend performance. Everything had to be cataloged and divided like evidence from a crime scene. Julia's family harassment campaign backfired spectacularly when the truth about her Miami adventures began spreading through our social circles. Her parents' initial outrage at my disappearing act shifted to uncomfortable silence as details emerged about why their daughter was suddenly single. Friends started sharing information that contradicted the victim narrative Julia had constructed, revealing planning and premeditation that made her family's demands for payment look ridiculous. The legal settlement left nobody completely satisfied but provided closure that allowed both sides to move forward separately. I ended up paying more than I wanted for some wedding costs, while Julia's demands weren't fully met. The compromise felt expensive but fair given the circumstances, and most importantly, it severed our financial connections permanently. Sometimes the cost of freedom is measured in dollars that hurt temporarily but provide permanent liberation from toxic relationships. My lawyer's final bill itemized months of correspondence, negotiations, and paperwork that exceeded the cost of Julia's elaborate floral arrangements. Every email, every phone call, every document review was documented and billed at hourly rates that made me appreciate how expensive justice can be. But the peace of mind that came from having professional legal protection during Julia's family's campaign of financial intimidation was worth every penny I paid for competent representation. The financial education I received during this ordeal became the most valuable learning experience of my adult life. Understanding my legal rights, learning to document everything, and discovering how to protect my assets during relationship dissolution were skills I'd never expected to need. Julia's Miami performance had cost me a wedding, but it saved me from years of marriage to someone I'd never really known. While I was dealing with lawyers and family drama, Julia's support network was preparing their own counterattack that would make the financial warfare look like a minor skirmish. The social media smear campaign. Julia's bridesmaids launched their coordinated social media attack with the strategic precision of a political campaign team protecting their candidate from scandal. Within hours of the wedding cancellation, Facebook posts started appearing that painted a carefully edited version of events designed to make Julia look like a victim of circumstance rather than the star of her own destruction. Their narrative featured one innocent drunken kiss that had been blown completely out of proportion by an unforgiving fiancé who couldn't handle normal bachelorette party behavior, conveniently omitting the 3 minutes and 42 seconds of high-definition footage that documented her enthusiastic participation in activities that required significantly more coordination than kissing. When confronted with people who'd heard different versions of what actually happened in Miami, the bridesmaids pivoted to accusations of slut-shaming and character assassination. They claimed I was trying to destroy Julia's reputation by spreading lies about her behavior, apparently forgetting that reputation destruction requires false information rather than documented evidence. Their defense strategy involved attacking anyone who questioned their sanitized version of events, turning the conversation away from Julia's actions and toward my supposed cruelty for not keeping her secrets. The comedy reached peak levels when these same women who had served as directors and producers of the incriminating evidence started claiming they had no idea what people were talking about regarding any video footage. They developed sudden amnesia about their roles as cinematographers and cheerleaders during Julia's Miami performance. The friends who had encouraged her behavior and captured it for posterity were now pretending they'd spent the entire weekend focused on sisterly bonding and innocent tourist activities. The propaganda campaign successfully convinced several mutual friends to take Julia's side based on incomplete information about what had actually happened in Miami. People who had known us for years started sending messages about forgiveness, second chances, and how real love meant working through problems instead of abandoning ship at the first sign of trouble. Friends who had never seen the video evidence were making judgments based on the carefully constructed false narrative that painted Julia as a victim of my unreasonable expectations. Social media became a battlefield where people chose sides without knowing the full story, creating a situation where truth took a backseat to loyalty and groupthink. Former friends posted supportive messages on Julia's Facebook page about how she deserved better treatment, while others shared inspirational quotes about forgiveness and moving forward after betrayal. The irony was perfect. People were giving advice about betrayal while supporting the person who had committed it. The slow revelation of truth began when other bachelorette party attendees who hadn't been part of Julia's inner circle started speaking up about what they'd actually witnessed during the Miami weekend. These women had been present for the events but hadn't participated in the cover-up campaign, and their accounts contradicted the sanitized version that Julia's core group had been spreading. Details emerged about planning, coordination, and activities that went far beyond any innocent mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. The most devastating revelation came when Lexi, one of Julia's bridesmaids, reached out with a guilt-induced confession that exposed the entire coordination effort behind Julia's Miami performance. She admitted to filming the video evidence and expressed regret about encouraging Julia's behavior throughout the weekend. Her confession revealed details about cocaine use during the trip and confirmed that Julia's Miami adventure hadn't been spontaneous but had involved planning and anticipation that made the betrayal even more calculated. This single admission shifted the entire online narrative as people realized the depth of deception involved in covering up Julia's actions. Lexi's confession included information that validated suspicions I've been developing about Julia's behavior patterns throughout our relationship. She confirmed that Julia had cheated before during previous girls' trips, revealing a history of infidelity that had been carefully hidden through group coordination and selective storytelling. This pattern of behavior made the Miami incident look less like a mistake and more like standard operating procedure that had finally been documented and exposed. The smear campaign's effectiveness gradually crumbled as more evidence emerged, and people started questioning the official narrative that Julia's friends had constructed. Social media posts that had initially generated supportive comments began attracting questions and contradictory information from people who knew different versions of the story. The coordinated effort to control the narrative fell apart when too many people had access to information that contradicted the carefully crafted fiction. Friends who had initially bought into the false narrative began apologizing after encountering evidence that revealed how thoroughly they'd been manipulated by the misinformation campaign. These apologies came with explanations about how convincing Julia's version had seemed and how difficult it was to imagine that people they trusted would lie so completely about such serious matters. The awkwardness of these conversations revealed how effective social media manipulation could be when deployed by people with personal stakes in controlling public perception. The age of social media had made it nearly impossible to maintain false narratives indefinitely, especially when multiple people possessed evidence that contradicted official stories. Truth had a way of emerging through various channels, often with documentation that made denial impossible. Julia's attempt to rewrite history through coordinated social media manipulation ultimately failed when confronted with witnesses, evidence, and people who valued honesty over loyalty to friends who had revealed their true character through their actions in Miami. Just when I thought the drama had reached its peak and I could finally start moving forward with my life, Julia had one more surprise waiting that would make everything that had happened so far look like a warm-up act. Plot twists and pregnancy scares. 4 months after the Miami disaster, Julia dropped the ultimate plot twist that made every soap opera writer jealous. She called me at work on a Tuesday afternoon claiming she was 4 months pregnant and that I was the father. The timing aligned perfectly with her Miami adventure, since conception would have occurred during the exact period when she was starring in her hotel room production with her 2 co-stars. Julia delivered this news like she was announcing a promotion rather than potentially trapping me in a lifetime connection to someone whose betrayal had already cost me everything I thought I wanted. My immediate reaction was to demand a paternity test, which Julia treated like I'd just insulted her mother, her cooking, and her entire family lineage simultaneously. Before any paternity had been established, her family called me a deadbeat father with impressive speed. Her mother left voicemails about my responsibility to step up and take care of my child, while her father threatened legal action to force me to pay child support. Their immediate assumption that I was the father and their aggressive demands for financial support created a comedy show that would have been hilarious if it wasn't potentially devastating to my future. The pregnancy announcement coincided with Lexi's guilt-induced confession about what had really happened during the Miami trip, adding layers to the disaster that kept getting worse every time I thought I'd heard everything. She revealed that cocaine had been involved throughout the weekend, painting a picture of Julia's adventure that was even more out of control than the video evidence had suggested. The drug use explained some of Julia's behavior and added another level of recklessness that made her pregnancy announcement even more concerning. Lexi's confession also included details about Julia's pattern of cheating that stretched back years before the Miami incident, confirming that her hotel room performance wasn't an isolated mistake, but evidence of systematic deception that had been going on throughout our entire relationship. She admitted that Julia had been unfaithful during previous girls' trips, always managing to keep her affairs secret through careful coordination with friends who helped maintain the cover stories. The paternity test became my lifeline to freedom from a situation that could have trapped me forever with someone who had revealed her true character through documented evidence. I insisted on the most comprehensive testing available, despite Julia's continued protests that I was being insulting and paranoid. The 2-week wait for results felt like the longest period of my life, knowing that the outcome would determine whether I'd be connected to Julia for the next 18 years or finally free to move forward completely. Julia's breakdown when the paternity test results arrived was spectacular enough to require professional intervention from people trained to handle emotional emergencies. The baby belonged to one of her Miami co-stars, not me, which freed me from any parental obligations while simultaneously destroying her last attempt at manipulation. She admitted through tears that she'd hoped the baby was mine because she thought it might give us a reason to work things out, revealing a level of desperation and twisted logic that made me grateful for the scientific proof. The Miami guy's reactions to Julia's pregnancy news provided additional comedy that highlighted the consequences of her weekend adventure. She'd contacted both men after discovering she was pregnant, hoping one of them would step up and take responsibility. The first guy blocked her number immediately after receiving her message, while the second wanted nothing to do with any consequences from their Miami encounter. Both men had apparently viewed their time with Julia as entertainment rather than the beginning of any ongoing relationship or responsibility. Julia's family completely changed their tune once the paternity results eliminated me from the equation, suddenly becoming supportive of their daughter's journey into single motherhood. The same people who had been demanding I take financial responsibility and calling me a deadbeat father started posting supportive messages about Julia's strength and resilience. Their quick pivot from attacking me to rallying around Julia revealed how family loyalty could override basic logic and fairness when the facts didn't support their initial position. The social consequences Julia faced became apparent as her reputation crumbled under the weight of accumulated truth from multiple sources who had witnessed her behavior patterns over the years. Friends who had initially supported her during the wedding cancellation drama started distancing themselves as more information emerged about her history of deception and infidelity. Her professional life suffered when details about her Miami adventure and drug use reached her workplace, causing her to lose opportunities and face uncomfortable conversations with supervisors. Julia's career took a significant hit when she was passed over for a promotion that had seemed guaranteed before the truth about her Miami weekend became public knowledge. Office gossip had apparently spread details about her bachelorette party activities and subsequent pregnancy drama, creating a professional environment where her judgment and reliability were questioned. The connection between personal behavior and professional consequences became evident as her reputation damage affected multiple areas of her life. The unmarried father of Julia's baby turned out to be a married man who refused to acknowledge the child or provide any support, leaving Julia to face single motherhood without assistance from anyone involved in creating the situation. His complete rejection of responsibility meant Julia would handle all the financial, emotional, and practical challenges of raising a child alone, while dealing with the social fallout from her Miami adventure and its aftermath. The entire pregnancy saga became a perfect example of how the universe sometimes saves you from disasters you didn't even realize were approaching at full speed. If Julia hadn't been caught in Miami, I might have married her and eventually discovered her cheating patterns while legally bound to someone whose idea of problem-solving involved manipulation, deception, and systematic betrayal. The paternity test results felt like a final gift from fate, ensuring that my connection to Julia's chaos was completely severed rather than extended through shared parenthood with someone who had proven herself untrustworthy in every possible way. Sometimes the most terrifying plot twists become the greatest blessings when they reveal truths that protect you from futures that would have destroyed everything you actually wanted in life. While Julia was dealing with the consequences of her choices, I was about to discover just how much better life could be without someone who had been holding me back all along. The phoenix rises from wedding ashes. The transformation from betrayed fiancé to thriving single man happened gradually over the months following my great disappearing act. While Julia was dealing with pregnancy scares and paternity tests, I was building a completely new life that bore no resemblance to the existence I'd planned with her. The freedom to make decisions based solely on my own interests felt revolutionary after 5 years of coordinating every choice with someone who had been lying about her true character the entire time. My promotion at work came 6 months after the wedding that never happened, bringing a substantial raise that opened doors I'd never expected to walk through. The extra income meant I could finally pursue travel plans that had been postponed indefinitely during our relationship while we saved for wedding expenses and house down payments. Julia had always found reasons why we couldn't afford trips or why the timing wasn't right for adventures, but suddenly I had both the money and the complete freedom to go wherever I wanted without consulting anyone about their preferences or schedules. My solo trips to Ireland and Thailand became revelations about how much I'd been limiting myself during our relationship. Each journey reinforced the same lesson about freedom and self-discovery that I'd been learning since Julia's Miami adventure accidentally liberated me from a future that would have slowly suffocated my independence. The man who had been planning a suburban married life was rediscovering his appetite for adventure and spontaneity that had been dormant for years. Meeting Melissa happened naturally at a photography class I'd enrolled in during my post-Julia Renaissance period. She was direct, honest, and refreshingly transparent in ways that highlighted everything that had been wrong with my previous relationship. When I told her the complete story of my canceled wedding and Julia's Miami performance, she listened without judgment and understood why trust issues might linger without making me feel broken or damaged for having reasonable concerns about future relationships. Melissa's patience with my recovery process made all the difference in learning to trust again. She never got defensive when I needed reassurance, never made me feel stupid for double-checking plans or wanting clarity about situations that reminded me of Julia's deceptive communication patterns. Her consistency and reliability created a foundation of security that allowed me to relax into a relationship where honesty wasn't optional and communication meant actually sharing information rather than carefully managing impressions. The contrast between dating Melissa and my years with Julia became more apparent every day. Melissa told me when she was going out with friends, shared details about her conversations with other people, and never made me feel like I was walking through a minefield of potential secrets or hidden agendas. She understood that rebuilding trust required transparency and consistent actions rather than just words about how much she cared. Our relationship developed with the kind of steady progress that felt completely different from the dramatic ups and downs that had characterized my time with Julia. There were no mysterious text messages, no suspicious gaps in communication, no friends who seemed to know secrets I wasn't supposed to discover. Melissa's life was an open book that she willingly shared, creating the kind of partnership I'd thought I had with Julia but had never actually experienced. The coffee shop encounter with Julia happened 18 months after our canceled wedding day, when I was meeting friends downtown and spotted her sitting alone at a corner table. She looked tired and overwhelmed in ways that spoke to the consequences of her choices catching up with her reality. Her pregnancy was showing, and she had that exhausted appearance of someone dealing with more stress than she could handle effectively. Julia approached me hesitantly and asked if we could talk for a few minutes. Her demeanor was completely different from the confident woman who had tried to manipulate me during our breakup conversations. "I'm sorry, not just for what I did but for how I handled everything after. You deserve better. I was selfish and stupid and I destroyed the best thing in my life." She admitted that her Miami adventure and subsequent attempts at damage control had been completely wrong, and she expressed regret about the pain she'd caused without trying to justify her behavior or ask for forgiveness. The apology felt authentic in ways that surprised me, giving me the closure I hadn't realized I needed. The poetic justice of our respective situations was impossible to ignore during that conversation. Julia was struggling with single motherhood, dealing with the father who wanted nothing to do with his child, and facing social consequences from her reputation being permanently damaged by the truth about her character. Meanwhile, I was flourishing in every aspect of my life, from professional advancement to personal relationships to the freedom to pursue interests that had been neglected during our relationship. Julia asked if I was happy, and the answer was obvious from everything about my appearance and demeanor. The question felt almost absurd given how dramatically our lives had diverged since her Miami performance ended our relationship. I was thriving while she was dealing with consequences that would affect her for years to come, creating a situation where her betrayal had accidentally become the best thing that ever happened to my personal development. My final realization during that coffee shop conversation was that I felt genuinely grateful for Julia's betrayal. because it had freed me to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to maintain a relationship with someone who had been deceiving me the entire time. The worst thing that had happened to me had become the catalyst for building a life that was infinitely better than anything I could have achieved while remaining trapped in a relationship built on lies and manipulation. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become unexpected gifts that redirect your entire life towards something better than you ever imagined possible. Looking back, Julia's betrayal was actually fate saving me from decades of marriage to someone I never really knew. What felt like the cruelest disaster imaginable turned out to be redirection toward a life I didn't know was possible. The best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or public humiliation. It's building something so much better than what you lost that you end up grateful for the betrayal that freed you to find it. If you've experienced a similar plot twist that ended up changing your life for the better, drop a comment below. And if you want to hear more stories about life's unexpected turns, make sure to subscribe for weekly updates.